This is The Right Approach. We are your hosts. I am J.W. Judge, and with me is Barbara Hinske. This is a podcast for writers to learn more about the craft of writing as we explore a new topic every week. Our guest today is back for a second episode, is Linden Gross. We talked last week about her experiences as a writing coach and specifically as the writing coach for Barb. And today, since Linden also does editing work, we're going to talk about all about editing. It's all about editing today, what different kinds of editing look like, and how to figure out what you as a writer need. So welcome back for round two.
Thank you.
Okay, let's start with what the different types of editing are, because I think a lot of writers, especially less experienced writers, they're doing their work, they're getting close to the end, and they think, I need an editor. I know I need an editor, but you don't really know what you need. And so let's break down what's available and what each one means.
Yeah. So let's start from the top, sort of go big picture to small picture. There's developmental editing. So a developmental editor is going to look at the book as a whole. If you're writing a novel, they're going to be looking at does the evolution of the story, the characters, does it work on that big storytelling front, character evolution front. If you're writing nonfiction, they're going to be looking at what is the argument that you're making in the book. Is that argument substantiated? They're going to be looking at whether certain pieces of the book need to move to other places, whether the order is logical. They're looking at the big picture. From there, we go to line editing. A line editor is going to be looking at language, at flow, at how you are, if you're using active versus passive verbs. They're looking at that piece of it, sort of the quality of the writing itself. Now we move down to copy editing, which is the piece that I always hire out. Period. I feel like we all got to know our strengths, and I feel like I'm a strong developmental editor. I feel like I'm a strong line editor. A, if I've worked on a project, I can't see it enough to be a copy editor, and B, I feel like I'm an adequate copy editor, which isn't good enough for anybody, including myself. And so a copy editor is really looking at what I call the minutia, because I don't like doing it. It's grammar, spelling. It's sometimes, depending on the agreement with your copy editor, it could be fact checking. It's consistency. They look at the little stuff. If you are, they're going to be looking for style. There are, happily enough, a number of different styles depending on where you're publishing. If you're writing a magazine article, most magazines use AP style. If you're writing a book, most book publishing companies go with Chicago Manual of Style. And of course, they don't always agree on how to do serial commas or no serial commas, or how to handle numbers. And because why would it make sense to have one consistent set of rules and make it easy? So that's the copy editor's job. They're looking at all that little stuff, how citations are handled, or footnotes, or block quotes, or it's all that kind of stuff.
All right.
And then proofreading.
And then there's proofreading.
Yeah.
Right.
At the very end. Yeah.
Which is sort of the backup on everybody.
Yeah.
Is there a general, and it may be that there's too much disparity to be able to answer this effectively, but authors don't, when they don't know what an editor is or does, they also don't know what costs are associated with that. Are there, so for each of those, there's going to be a different type of cost that is incurred, or a different amount. I don't know if there's anything that's close enough to be able to say what the expectation should be there, but I don't know if there's, cents per word that you should expect for line editing versus copy editing versus developmental editing, but how does that in general terms, what does that look like?
Developmental editing is probably the biggest variant. And I think a lot of it has to do with who you're hiring, how much experience they have, just what they charge. So that one's a harder one to answer. I can tell you what I charge, and it's a fair amount. It's I charge $17.50, and that includes reading the book and submitting a very detailed memo that starts with, as I mentioned last week, that starts with what I think works in the book. That part is always pretty short because if it's working, we really don't need to talk about it. What I think does not work and what I think needs to be done. And I then go from big picture to language to grammar and spelling and that kind of thing. So again, it sort of follows that developmental line editor, copy editing idea. A line editor and a copy editor, there is a website, and I'm afraid I can't remember exactly what the URL is, but that does spell out sort of suggested standard editing rates for freelance editors. And a number of editors that I work with and who I know Barb works with will follow that. There's also I think that so how much you're going to pay is going to vary. I would offer two caveats. That what I hear a lot from clients are two things. One is they say, well, I need a copy edit. And I say, no, you actually need a line edit first. We've been working together, but you need a line editor. And most good copy editors will not copy edit a project that has not been professionally line edited. The other thing I hear a lot is, my neighbor was a school teacher. My cousin is my wife is very good at proofreading. No, if you're going to do a professional job, you need to hire a professional. Your neighbor, cousin, spouse, maybe your proofreader, possibly, or one of, but they're not going to be your editor. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. If I can jump in here, a couple of comments. Hollywood there are lots of films that center on writers, and then there's the editor relationship is in there. They almost always get it wrong from my perspective. So anybody who hasn't worked with an editor, don't watch, something's got to give or whatever. It's not going to be like that. That's number one. And I think it is helpful. And number two, you get what you pay for. So don't always go the cheap option. I think in terms of where you put your money on a book, editing is right up there at the top. I'm indie published, so, and I've made a living at it. It isn't just a hobby I feed. So I know that spending the money is worthwhile. I also know that it's wise to make your work as good as possible before you send it to your editor. So if you can run it through ProWriting Aid or Grammarly and clean up, as you can't clean it all up, it won't catch it all, but clean up as much of that stuff as you can. When I've sent my work to, I've got a couple of copy editors and line editors that I work with and proofreaders. When I send it to them, I get the comment back, they're willing to slot me in maybe a little sooner because they know that I will be giving them a pretty clean manuscript and it won't be such a big project. It still costs me the same, but I've moved up the queue a couple of times because somebody said, oh, well, I found, somebody's canceled. I have 2 weeks. I know I can do yours in that amount of time. So even if it doesn't save you money, it could save you time.
I think the other thing is, as an editor, if I get a manuscript that's just a mess in terms of spelling, that means I have to devote my time to correct that. That's not really what you want to hire my brain power for.
Right.
when a spell check can do the job for you. You know, you want to sort of hire my brain for the piece that you can't take care of, right?
Right.
The part where my experience, you don't need a lot of experience to correct the spelling of a word. You need experience, or that subjective opinion that to weigh in, to give a sense of why something might not be working and how to make it work better. That's the part that you want to hire me for, and that's where you want my energy to go.
Well, and that's a very good point, because just as the edit or the author themselves, you've written it so many times, you are not just, your brain is not going to see all the errors in there. They just are not. All the times where you should have been she, but you typed he, because your S didn't hit the key hard enough. You won't see that. You don't. So as you go through the editing process, you don't want to use up someone's, like Linden's, brain power on that little stuff, because then they get immersed in it and they won't see that stuff.
Right.
It's the same for all of us. And anyone who thinks that the same person can take it from developmental edit through proofread, I think that would be extraordinarily unusual to find any one person that has the ability to do that accurately. And I spend a ton of money, and I have a separate, so Linden and I write it together, in essence, development editing as we go along. I have a copy line editor, and I have a proofreader, and I have art groups that read my books for reviews. And I always get typos on the arcs, always.
Yeah.
So it's just part of it. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Y'all work in chunks. You write some and send it. And so this is an established relationship. It's different than someone you worked with for the first time. And when y'all did work together for the first time, it was the whole manuscript. So when you're submitting it now to Linden in these chunks, are you cleaning it up first, or are you sending it? Because I know y'all are working out, does this work? So is that still in a rougher form, or have you already put in work to make sure it's cleaner and put it through Pro Writing Aid or whatever?
I thank you for asking that. Now that my eyesight is good enough that I can use Pro Writing Aid, I put it through Pro Writing Aid for both of us, so that a lot of that stuff is gone. The one thing I haven't learned how, but you told me I can do this, is on Pro Writing Aid, and I'm going to put that on my list this afternoon, is figure out how to screen for repeated words. That I've still got to do, but I try and do that little bit of cleanup before Linden puts her eyes on it, so she isn't distracted by all of that.
So Linden, let me ask this. We've talked about if my math is right, I'm a lawyer, we don't have to do math, 4 different kinds of editing, with developmental editing and copy editing, line editing, and proofreading, that all have different functions. Does everybody need all 4 of those steps?
Not necessarily. So the developmental edit, a lot of people skip. Barb and I have that because we're working together as the writing coach piece. I feel that that's an incredibly important piece, because that's, how your whole book hangs together. But a lot of people will skip that. Do you need a line editor? I mean, a developmental editor? I think it helps.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of a non-answer. Ideally, yes. Will an awful lot of people skip that piece? Yes. Again, for me, just as a lot of copy editors will not touch a book that has not been line edited, I will not edit a book that I have not done a critique on, which sort of ends up having me function as a developmental editor, because that is my way of looking at the book and saying, yes, it works, or no, I think that there's some rather large pieces that need to be addressed. And again, it is, and even talking about the language, so that the person I'm going to be working with knows that we're on the same page. And there are times when, yes, at that point, we end up working together in a writing coach capacity before we get back to the editing. I think it's important. I had one writing coach client who ended up quitting our writing coach relationship because she wanted to get her master's of fine arts from Mills College, and took the project there, worked with a professor for about an assistant professor for about 6 months. And only at the end of that 6 months did she realize that he had a different vision for the book than she did. And so the 6 months worth of work had taken her down completely the wrong path. That's a lot of time and a lot of money to spend heading the wrong direction. So that's the developmental editor piece that's key, is if you are going to hire a developmental editor, you better make sure that you're developing along the path that you actually want to be on. There are times in terms of line editing and copy editing, depending on how clean your manuscript is, sometimes you can get away with hiring somebody who will do both, who will do what we're sort of calling a deep copy edit. But that is usually, for example, I've been able to do that, but I've done my own line edit. And since I'm an editor, I can do that. But then I also realize that I'm very close to the material. So I will say, I've done my own line edit, but I'm pretty darn close to this. So I need you to do copy editing, but I need you to throw in a little, line, wear your line editor hat while you're doing it.
Yeah.
You can get away with that, I think, if you have experienced line editing. Otherwise, I would sort of say your line edit and your copy edit are pretty critical.
But, jumping into that, I'm at the point now where the same person does the copy and the line edit for me. So that's been nice. I want to piggyback on your comment about making sure that you are on the same page with your developmental editor. Because one of the books that we wrote, one of my Who's There collection serial killer books is Final Circuit. I love that book. I'm so proud of that book. And an agent I knew, who we never entered into a formal agreement, but wanted to take it to the Amazon imprints and wanted me to have her developmental editor look at it. Her developmental editor did. And so Final Circuit has a protagonist who has a disability and who, I don't think this is a spoiler, but saves herself at the end. This editor, who supposedly was very good at packaging things for purchase by one of the Amazon imprints, said, okay, you need to take away the disability of your protagonist, and the cop, her love interest, needs to save her at the end. And I thought, what are you talking about? Are we not in the 2000s? She said, no, it needs to be the damsel in distress and not this quirky.
And that was a deal breaker for you.
Yeah, and that was a deal breaker. Not this quirky, brainiac woman who people think, because of her disability, discount her, who's really just brilliant and who saves herself. So no, that was something I rejected, and I didn't get published by the Amazon imprint, but that's
well,
okay.
That brings up another topic, which is how you play with your editor. And I use that because I feel like Barb and I do kind of play.
Yeah, we do.
But the relationship is very different if you are working with a traditional publishing house. At that point, the editor is the boss. You give the editor what they want, period. You really don't have the option to say no. And how you work with your editor, I remember at one point, I was working actually for a friend of mine. It was on my second, it wasn't a ghostwriter, it was a collaboration, but my second book for them. They had published The Legacy of Luna, which had turned into the bestseller. And I was working with Jay Baker, the son of Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. And he has an interesting story. Anyway, I had submitted the manuscript, and she gets on the phone and she's screaming at me, which is not that unusual with editors. It happens both on magazines and otherwise, about how the book doesn't work. And I'm listening to her, and as I'm trying to not react emotionally to the fact that I'm getting yelled at, I'm trying to listen to what she's saying and where the problem is, because I thought I had done a pretty good job. And she finally stopped, and I finally realized, I said, so what you're talking about is we just need to change this one thing in the first chapter. And there was this long silence, and she said, oh yeah, that would do it. So what you find a lot with some editors who you work with is that one thing will color their whole sense of a project. And so you have to sort of listen to what that one piece is, or a couple of pieces, and try to figure out, okay, what is coloring this sense that the whole book doesn't work? Oh, it's just this one little piece in the opening chapter, and if we switch that, then the problem solved. So that's its own, my personal reaction would be, if I have my choice of editors to work with, if I'm working independently, that's not the kind of editor I would hire for a number of reasons.
And so,
But sometimes you don't have a choice.
And so that's an important distinction here that hasn't been made until you said it just now, was if you sell the rights to your book to a publisher, they are in charge and get to call the shots because they have bought it. Whereas in the kind of relationship Barb has with you and with her other editors, she is the employer and she gets to make all of the ultimate decisions because she hasn't sold or licensed any rights. She has hired you to work with her. And if that relationship isn't working, it can be ended.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now I totally forgot what I was going to follow up on that next. It was a really good point.
Yeah, let me jump in on that because, yeah, you retain, as the author, you retain all that power and authority, but it also comes with the obligation to make sure that if you want to be commercially successful, you need to know where the market is. You need to know what's selling, what people want to buy, so that you're producing that product for them. So it's kind of a high bar. Part of it is it's kind of comforting to think, oh, I'm just going to rely on somebody else to know, and that editor will just tell me what to do to fix it, and I'll do it, and then I'm going to be James Patterson and back up the wheelbarrows of money. Well, that's not realistic. But the flip side is, if you're going it alone, you better devote time to maintain your knowledge of the market.
Just so in a lot of ways, it's a business decision of what's the business model you want. If you want to be in charge of everything, so my first 3 books were all nonfiction books about law practice. And the first one was published through the American Bar Association, because they are the folks who put out books about law practice stuff. And I had a good experience with them. I'm glad I did the first book with them. But I also learned that I want more control over everything than that allowed. And so every book that I've done since, I have done independently because that's what I want to do. I've even branched out into publishing books for some other lawyers. But those relationships, one of them was with an IP lawyer. And so we talked a lot about how we wanted to structure the publishing agreement and the rights. And ultimately what we landed on was, I didn't want to be a rights holder for her children's book that she was writing. She didn't want to have to learn all of the nuances of publishing. And so I just licensed the right to publish that book in English for a period of time that would renew year to year after that. And so there are other options, but you got to know what you are willing to do and want to do as far as business wise and learning. And that should inform your decision about whether you want to be an independent author or try to go do it under the traditional publishing route.
Well, and you can also hire a consultant to help you with that. I think the other piece of the decision, and you alluded to it earlier, Jeremy, is control. One of the things that once a publishing house has, once you have a contract with the publishing house, they are going to dictate cover design. You may get to weigh in, maybe not. They are going to dictate titles. And I'll tell you a quick story, and I'm going to have to turn. Actually, hang on, I'm losing battery here. But I had I was writing a book for Charles Schwab and his daughter, Carrie Pomerantz, or Carrie Schwab Pomerantz. And it was a book about how, oops, sorry, I'm creating a disaster here. It was a book about how we still don't talk about money. You know, we've even gotten better about talking about sex, but you know, we don't talk about money with anybody, and that there are important money conversations that need to happen with our loved ones, with our parents, with our spouses, with our children. And so that was what the book was about. And the editor came back and said, "Oh, we have come up with such a fantastic title. It's so great. We're going to call it Home Economics." And we're like, "Oh my God, can you say dead fish?" I just terrible title. Luckily, and I'm going to guess it had something to do with the Schwab name. They were willing to reconsider this brilliant title they had come up with and decided upon. And ultimately, the book was published under the title "It Pays to Talk." I'm going to guess that had Linden Gross been the byline person, they would have been like, you know, suck it up. It's Home Economics. That's what the title of the book is. So you are sacrificing that control. You may be able to weigh in on the cover. They may take your opinion into account, but it is there, as you alluded to, it has become their property to sell. And so that's a big decision.
So I think we're probably closing in toward the end of this. I see Barbara taking some notes there. I don't know if she has something she wants to weigh in on here. But I think an important part of this is, where can authors find an editor?
That's a good question. For me, I try to find my editors through referral. I don't just go online and find, you know, and type in editor. I will ask people I know who are writing, or who I know who know people who are writing, for suggestions. I have, because of what I do, I've had a number of people come up to me locally and say, you know, "Oh, I work as a copy editor." And there have been a couple of times I've thought, okay, you know, let's try you out on a small project and see if I like the quality of the work. And so I think that that's another way to go.
Well, and so for folks who don't have a referral network like that, I believe that Readsy and the Alliance of Independent Authors are two places where authors can go, where, you know, there's people who have been vetted, which doesn't necessarily mean they'll be a good fit for you individually, but there are people who've been vetted that, you know, are professionals. So I think that brings us to a really great place to end this conversation. Thank you so much for both of these episodes. It's been really informative and helpful, and hoping much future success to y'all together as you work on, I guess next will be your 21st book together.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Linden. This has been great.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.